didn't Putin tell us the other day in his rather rambling speech sitting behind a desk? He regrets the fall of the old Soviet Union, and he believes most of these countries, which never belonged, quote unquote, to Russia in the first place, whether they conquer them or not, should never have been released. So he's not just looking at Ukraine. He's already taken Crimea. He's already taken a big chunk of Georgia. He's looking well beyond that, ladies and gentlemen, where even the EU has said we could be looking at a world war here, a huge war in Europe. What does Ukraine have to do with us? What does Taiwan have to do with us? What does Iran have to do with us? What does any of it have to do with us? And our allies, what do you think they would do if we just walk away? They'd walk away from us. We'd be all alone. An ocean's not far enough to protect us anymore. What is this 15th century thinking that I'm hearing? Or even before that, you think it's the Vikings? You think it's, it's like, why do you think they're building hypersonic missiles with nuclear warheads on them? I mean, it's just nuts. So yes, we should have poured all kinds of weaponry into Ukraine. The dunderhead in the Oval Office had an entire year to do this. He's got the same advisors that Obama did, because these are Obama people who put us in this position. 2014, those two provinces in eastern Ukraine, which now Putin on his own has claimed, okay, they're independent. He's claiming provinces in another country are independent. Why? Because he's following Hitler's strategy. What was Hitler's strategy? Well, at least early on in the Sudetenland, Hitler said the Sudetenland has always been German. There's a lot of ethnic Germans there. Many of the people there speak German. They want to be part of Germany. So he goes in and he takes the Sudetenland. And then he moves along. He moves, well, there's a lot of Germans over here. And actually, we don't care about Germans. We care about now our defensive lines. We can't defend ourselves while this country's over here. Same thing. Same thing. That's what's going on here. So let's take a little listen at this production from the Today Show. Putin signals no compromise on Ukraine. Of course, there's no compromise on Ukraine. Biden's been begging them for a compromise for 2 months. Go.
Signaling no compromise, Vladimir Putin this morning said Russia is always open to direct and honest dialogue, but that its security concerns, which he said include NATO expansion, are non-negotiable.
NATO expansion. I've heard this even some of our friends on Fox. Nobody's even entertaining inviting Ukraine into NATO. Ukraine would like to be part of NATO, but none of NATO has agreed to that. And so I hear the apologists saying, well, we're provoking Putin and Russia. We're provoking them? Yes, they need their space. They need a space around them too. That phraseology, interestingly enough, is phraseology that Putin and his equivalent of the KGB and security group has been using. We need our space. And now it's being regurgitated on cable TV. Go ahead.
Addressing Russians, he praised the country's military, saying it would continue to develop cutting-edge weapons, including evasive hypersonic missiles. The Pentagon believes Russia has already deployed them near Poland, along with the 150,000-plus troops ringing Ukraine. Hours before Putin spoke, Ukraine's President Zelensky mobilized his national reserves, vowing never to give in as Ukraine edges closer to an open war that threatens the stability of all of Europe. This is what it's like now to live in Ukrainian villages near pro-Russian separatists. The Ukrainian Interior Ministry, which posted the video, said separatist fire here killed one man. The separatists have dramatic...
The separatists are a Russian army. I don't know why we play this game. They haven't taken their identifying patches off, their identifying uniforms off. This is the Russian army playing the role of separatists, working with guerrilla militia types that they've trained and they've funded and they've provided weaponry to, attacking the homes of these Ukrainians. Go ahead.
Increased their attacks over the last several days, goading the Ukrainian military to respond now that they have protection from President Putin. who yesterday extended the goalposts, saying he doesn't just recognize the independence of Russian-speaking separatists in territory they already control, but also in vast areas now firmly in the hands of the Ukrainian government, including the Soviet-era industrial port city of Mariupol, home to 450,000 people.
So now he just claims that industrial port, 500,000 Ukrainians here, that's part of Russia's security blanket. Wow. Wow, and these Russia-phobes in our own country, Russia kiss-assers, and these neo-appeasers and neo-sellouts in radio and TV, just unbelievable. Go ahead.
Last night, protesters gathered in this city to support their government. People here are getting nervous. Among them, Victoria, a 28-year-old musician and missionary, along with her husband and son.
I can say I have all of our documents with me in my backpack in case something starts. I also feel brave because I know that these people will never give up.
Putin describes Ukraine as a historic part of Russia that needs to be saved from its NATO-loving puppet government.
We don't feel that we have to be saved by him because we speak Russian.
Do you think that he's going to stop?
I'm afraid that he wants to keep going.
And if he does keep going, what does that mean for you, for the people here?
It doesn't mean that it's a time of peace. It means it's a time of sadness. It's a time of war, of death.
And Savannah, just in the last few minutes, while that report was airing, we heard more rounds fired from the separatist areas landing in Ukraine. And the Ukrainian government said that it is now taking steps toward implementing a state of emergency. Savannah?
All right, Richard Engel right there. Thank you very much.
State of emergency. The president of Ukraine is a very courageous young man. He's a reformer. He's being attacked because he's locked up the opposition leader. The opposition leader is one of Russia's cronies. While he's putting in place militia law, I will remind you that, as I did on radio, that after the first Battle of Bull Run, the capital of the United States, Washington, D.C., was in direct threat by this newly created Confederacy, breakaway Confederacy. And Lincoln was trying to get troops to protect Washington, D.C., not just from the South, but from the North, because Maryland was a split state, really half slave, half free, and half pro Confederacy, half against. But one of the northern cities that was mostly pro-slavery was Baltimore. And the Massachusetts infantry couldn't get to Washington because of violent riots where the people in Baltimore were literally attacking, brutalizing, and in some case killing forces that were coming down from Massachusetts. So what was Lincoln to do? What would you do? You know what Lincoln said? He sent other parts of his army to Baltimore and said, lock them up. Anybody who prevents forces from the North from coming down to protect Washington, the capital of the North, capital of the United States, were to be locked up. And he's told, well, that violates the Constitution, habeas corpus. People have a right to due process, to take them to court. He said, what am I to do? If I don't do this, there'll be no court to take them to. There'll be no city. Lock them up. Was he a fascist? Was he a dictator when he did that? They were also cutting telegraph lines so they couldn't communicate with forces in the North. And so he put an end to that. Congress would later come back, which they have the power to do under the Constitution, and grant him that power to suspend habeas corpus. But what was he supposed to do? Now, I'm not one who favors such things, but I certainly understand it under this circumstance, don't you? Abraham Lincoln wasn't trying to be a dictator. He's trying to save what was left of the country. They lost the states in the Deep South, including Virginia. He didn't want to lose the border states at that time, states like Kentucky and Missouri and so forth. The country was already in a disastrous situation. the issue over the slaves, the issue over the Union, even the Republican Party in the North, they were fighting with each other over whether to embrace the abolition of slavery wholeheartedly or whether to fight and sue for peace and leave the issue for slavery for another day. And Lincoln's getting 1,000 different pieces of advice. And ultimately, of course, he decides we must keep the Union and we must end slavery. He would eventually sign the Emancipation Proclamation, which was a very, very big deal. And people say that was unconstitutional. And yet he did it, and it was very, very important that he did do it. And so I look at this situation in Ukraine where we have people sitting on their fat asses from New York and Washington with a camera in front of their face after they've had a pound of makeup put on their nose and say, oh, this guy, this president of Ukraine, it's not a democracy, it's a dictatorship. Look at what he's done. As opposed to Trudeau in Canada, of course. Trudeau in Canada is a dictator. He's doing things to his own people that are absolutely outrageous. He's not facing brigades of Russian troops and 500 Russian tanks. Well, Ukraine is. And if Ukraine has any hope of surviving, it's going to need a strong leader, and I think it has one. It doesn't have the weapons it needs and so forth and so on, and it's a terrible, terrible thing. Half of Russia's army's on the border with Ukraine now. Half of their army. And then 2 days ago, they invaded Ukraine, these two provinces, and the media were debating on whether or not it was an invasion. And I said then, of course it's an invasion. The Russian army had, gone into southern parts of Arizona, New Mexico, and Texas. I think that'd be called an invasion, don't you folks? And then declare certain counties as not part of the United States because people there speak Russian, or let's say it's Mexico and they say people there speak Spanish. Would that be an invasion? Of course it would be an invasion.
Want to see more? Sign up for Levin TV.